Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Kaveh Nabatian, a writer and director whose work includes the short film Vapor, which was selected for TIFF's Canada's Top 10, and the experimental feature The Seven Last Words. His latest, Sin La Habana, was just named Best Canadian Film at the Vancouver International Film Festival. It stars Yona Acosta as a Cuban ballet dancer and Aki Yagubi as the Iranian-Canadian divorcee he sees as his ticket to a better life for himself and his girlfriend in Canada. But things get complicated. It's now playing at the Carlton Cinema in Toronto and available to rent or buy on Apple TV. Kaveh picked Happy Together, Wong Kar-wai's exquisite 1997 study of a couple coming apart, coming back together, and coming apart again. La Yufei and Ho Po Wing, played respectively by the exquisitely talented Tony Leung and Leslie Cheung, have come to Argentina to see the Iguazu Falls and take one last shot at healing their fractious relationship. It doesn't go well, but they can't give up on each other, even as Po Wing spirals into misery and Yufei makes a connection with another man played by Cheung. As with most of Wong's cinema, that's not the point. The plot isn't important. It's the connections, the emotional tension, and the exquisite sense of longing he infuses into every frame. It's what he does. It's why we watch. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, there's a few films that are life-changing for me as a director. I'm sure all directors have a bunch. And I guess I chose Happy Together because of those films that have been just super inspiring to me, or films that have made me either decide to become a filmmaker or to keep on becoming a filmmaker. Happy Together is the one that is kind of closest in a way to the film I made in terms of approach and visual style and stuff. So I felt like it was the most relevant for this moment. But it could have been, there's a handful of other ones that have really blown my mind open.
Yeah, I did catch a similarity, I think, emotionally, if not texturally.
Right.
Well, I should preface this. For some reason, nobody picked a Wong movie for the longest time. And then this year this is the third episode of a Wong film.
Wow.
We did Chungking Express in the spring, and then Fran Kranz picked 2046 and Michael Haneke's Time of the Wolf as two influences on his film Mass. So it's just been fascinating to watch his stuff be rediscovered in a weird way from that angle. I mean, it's
absolutely. I think that I never gave up on it. I mean, because I love Happy Together in particular, but also the other ones have been just so formative for me and yeah, kind of life-changing. And in the aughts, when I feel like he became very unhip in a way, because so all of a sudden it was all Michael Haneke, and it was very still camera, very kind of desaturated, kind of like movies about sadness and distance and alienation and stuff, and kind of Christopher Doyle's wild textural stuff and Wong Kar-wai's just general approach and music and everything. I think it felt kind of gross and passé or something. I was like, well, I just love it, and I never stopped loving it. And then all of a sudden, the last few years, I think it maybe sort of started with Moonlight, because Moonlight had a lot of direct Wong Kar-wai influences. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, everybody was like, who is this guy? And now it's like, you can see Wong Kar-wai films in New York at IFC, and it's all kind of happening again, and great, because they are great films. But it's weird. It's okay, now it's popular again, and then it won't be again. And it's funny how people's taste goes with that stuff.
Yeah, I wonder if sort of the 1-2 punch of 2046 and My Blueberry Nights kind of derailed him in a way and made him seem unhip, just as the other art cinemas were moving in. I remember seeing Ashes of Time Redux at Cannes. The one year I went to Cannes, it was playing there, and it felt like a window into another era. It was just so radically different from the style that he had subsequently taken, where yes, it's meditative, and it's similarly, I mean, it is absolutely undoubtedly a Wong movie, but it's also part of a period. It's part of a world. It's part of there's a quasi fantasy aspect to some of it. And it just felt like an outlier in his filmography, which struck me as so odd, because there's the continuity from beginning to end of all of his films. They're all kind of associated. They're all thinking through the same thing.
Yeah. Kind
of. And the three that run together for me, like Chungking Express, Happy Together, and In the Mood for Love, are just this the pure stuff, the arc of melancholy that runs through those three films. It just feels like he's absolutely working at the peak of his powers.
Yeah. And I would put Fallen Angels in there as well. I think that's a magnificent movie too, even though it never kind of blew up as much as the other ones.
Yeah. It's weird, actually, now that you mention it. I always forget that it's part of that wave.
Yeah.
Feels like it just happened a little bit before. Maybe it's I don't know, actually. I don't know why I would think that. It's just lodged outside my brain in a strange way. This is the one that feels most adventurous, really, for me.
Yeah.
The switching between color and black and white and the locations and the fact that he's just, so many of his films are suffocating in their internalization. They're about people trapped in apartments and spaces and hallways. And this is outside and alive in a way that the other films don't try to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it feels like, I mean, there's always the comparison with French New Wave and the kind of the way he cuts and the energy of his films, like Godard in particular, which I definitely see. But the way he works with texture, and in particular in Happy Together, the way he moves between black and white and color and the wildly different color stocks, like he's got the cross-process stuff of the Iguazu Falls, and then he's got this, they really thought about which film stock to use for which scene, and they weren't afraid of moving it around. And you look at like The Sacrifice, like Tarkovsky, or you look at some of Bergman's stuff, and there's also this ability to move from kind of real world to dream world, black and white to color, that I find really exciting. And I feel like, I mean, to me, that's something that's always inspired me, is like, why do we have to decide there's like one very sober, clean language to a film? Like why can't the film form follow the emotional arc of the people? And that's something that I feel like he does in that film super well. And in general, it's something that I aspire to as well.
And this is one of his few films where the romance itself is curdled, that we can tell right away that they're not great for each other, even though they so desperately want to be. And it becomes, long before it actually is a tragedy, it's tragic. And the emotion that plays in those frames and between, I'm clogging up thinking about all the moments, all the images, and the way that that Wong just lets them kind of spill out across each other. And that's part of the stock trick as well, right? It's not only is he playing with texture, but he's playing with emotional texture. So the agitation works its way into the frame, and the cutting starts to support that too. And it's suffused. I screened, I think I told the story on the Frank Kranz episode. I screened In the Mood for Love at an open air theater in Toronto at Harbourfront in 2011, I want to say. And it was a hot, humid night, and it was perfect. It was just the perfect environment for that. This film doesn't give you that sense of atmosphere in the same way. Like the air itself feels hostile in some of these shots because of the way that Doyle has approached it. And after a while, it's hard to tell if Buenos Aires is contaminating them and making them angry with each other because they're both exiles in their own way, and one more than the other, or if they're just using the environment as an excuse to let loose because they're free from the expectations that they would have back home. And this lets them be their worst selves at each other.
Yeah, their worst selves, and also, at times their best selves. And, there's real love there. It's really a meditation on longing. And I guess most of his films are meditations on longing. But this one, I feel like, he went into some darker places. And the fact that you kind of don't want them to end up together is different from his other films. When the other ones, you're like, oh, come on, you guys can do it. And this one's like, you guys are really toxic for each other. But we've all been there. We've all been in toxic relationships where we really longed, we wanted it to be different than it is. And, there's like this masochistic element to it. And I think that what's amazing about him is just that, like, the story, if you wrote it down, it kind of sucks. Like, it's really not, it'd be really hard to get it financed, through Telefilm or whatever, if you like gave them the script for that. But what he does is he paints these brush strokes of these different kind of like colors of melancholy and longing, and puts it together in this way that is just, I think it's so emotional, and on top of just being visually insanely beautiful. And like yesterday, I wanted to make sure I actually knew what I was talking about, because it's probably been a few years since I saw it.
Yeah.
So I'm editing a film right now, and I just couldn't sit down and watch the whole thing. But I scanned through it, and just scanning through it, I started getting choked up and kind of teary eyed because it's so. I just think it's so powerful, those images, and most of the time you get that through like amazing acting and amazing story that puts you in these like melodramatic situations. But with him, it's like it's texture and atmosphere, and just you somehow get into this world of that they're living in, and it's so powerful.
It is the specificity that Tony Leung and Leslie Cheung bring to these roles too. These are people who they've known each other too well, right? Like it's the longing for the original relationship that they first had, the first attraction, the first glimmer. And that was something I rediscovered. I hadn't watched it for quite a while. I'm going to guess maybe 15 years. And then I caught it again when Criterion released the box this spring, and was just amazed at how differently it played for me. Cause I've been with my wife. I mean, we met almost 20 years ago, and it's not a comment on our relationship that I could suddenly relate to the idea of these guys, these two men who have been together just long enough to see each other's flaws, but not long enough to appreciate them, to come out the other side of it. And there's that moment in any relationship where you start kind of making a catalog and thinking, well, we can live with this. I can live with that. This is a compromise. I don't like this. We can work on that. And it's about myself as much as it is about her. And it's really ultimately all in my own head and has nothing to do with her. But I didn't see it the first time through. I didn't see that stage of their development. And I was amazed at how my own life suddenly became informative to understanding the film. And the greatest thing about movies is that they don't change. We do. The films stay the same. Yeah. But he caught that. And it was really weird to then go and watch Shang-Chi and see Tony Leung in a Marvel movie, 6 months after. He's great. He is legitimately great in both the martial arts action stuff and also the sheer screen charisma of Tony Leung, because he just is who he is. And there's a beauty of, there is a sheer, I mean, okay, I'm not going to get into Shang-Chi too much, but the film opens with a 10-minute sequence in Mandarin, including, and at least half of that is a wuxia fight between Tony Leung and the woman his character will fall in love with. And I was so impressed with Destin Cretton going, you know what? I don't care. This is how this movie has to play. And all these people coming to see a Marvel blockbuster are going to sit here and watch something beautiful for a while with one of the most interesting actors in the world. And let it happen. And that was maybe 4 months after I'd last revisited Happy Together. And so there's that time travel as well, where suddenly he doesn't look much older, but he's held up beautifully. But there's more melancholy in him now. And you can't help but bring all of the weight of his previous work to this role in a giant action machine. And Michelle Yeoh's in there too. And the film uses them as icons, but he's just so good at the tiny minimalist hurt that he brings to Yue-Fei. And it's just magnificent. And Leslie Cheung is wonderful, but all you can think of now is how he died so young, and how there's so much more he could have been doing. And so it feels doubly tragic through that lens. Yeah.
And he's just so beautiful and charismatic in Happy Together, despite the fact that he's a little jerk, like he's a manipulative asshole in a way, but at the same time, you see why Tony Leung's character is so in love with him, because there's just something magic that he like exudes.
Yeah. Again, it's here it is. I pulled up Scott Tobias's review from the AV Club just so I could refer to this, because it's a beautiful line that he observed. Wong shows a lot of insight into how bad relationships persist beyond their expiration date, which is just so evident in that film, that they should be done, but they can't be done.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of the sense of sadness that permeates the whole movie, is that there is a better relationship for these two. They never had it, and they just keep trying to recapture the original attraction, and never works.
Yeah.
And then that title just keeps coming up and making fun of them.
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting you mentioned the expiration date, because there's like the Chungking
the pineapple.
And then in this film, there's like they keep on wanting to start over. That's the whole thing. So we can start again, we can start over, and of course you can't really ever start over. So, and I think like that both the ideas of an expiry and of starting over are very like much a part of his whole thing.
Mm-hmm. And then the next one is In the Mood for Love, where it never even starts. Right, the whole thing is about an affair that doesn't happen, an emotional connection that doesn't proceed any further.
Yeah. I think it was interesting too in this film because Tony had to do these intimate, like pretty intimate scenes with Leslie Cheung, and I remember reading how he found it. It was hard for him, and Leslie was like, "This is what I have to do all the time. Tough luck, deal with it," But I thought it was interesting to show. It's not exactly explicit, but there's some real alive sexuality in that film. It's rare to see that, to see in any kind of movie, really, that vibe, and especially in Chinese art house movie that's about a gay couple. It's very like it's kind of starts with this thing and gets you right into, okay, we're not in a typical movie here.
Yeah, I mean, that was my first experience of it, I think, at TIFF, not knowing anything about it other than that it was from the guy who made Chungking Express.
Yeah.
And it's pretty confrontational. And in a way that is a statement, right? I mean, it's simply, it works narratively because you're seeing the intimacy and the love between them.
Mm-hmm.
And it works in a way that's in a completely different way to the audience as a declaration that this isn't going to be a manicured, delicate treatment of, it's not an arm's length movie about this relationship. And and for a film to come out of China and to be, the art house circuit was ready for it. There were other films that were just as explicit, if not more so. And it doesn't ultimately matter, right? That the sexuality is, I don't even know how to articulate this. It's not brazen as a cinematic choice.
No.
Right? It's just honest.
Yeah.
And Wong said at the time that he didn't see it as a love story between two men. He said it was a study of love that between two characters that happened to be men, which felt to me like a way to get around possible censorship at home.
Well, also very much how I see that movie. Like, I feel like often, I guess what makes it unusual is that when we see a lot of depictions of homosexual sex in movies are these kind of like, it's like a gay movie. Like it's a movie about, gayness, about homosexuality, and it's going to play on the LGBTQIA film circuit. And that's like the thing it's doing. And not that it'll only play there, but it's like, this person makes these, like Xavier Dolan or whatever, they're very clearly like gay films, And this one, it was kind of neither here nor there. They happen to be gay, and it's a movie just about humans. And that's what I really like about it. One of the things I really like about it is like, it could have been a guy and a girl, but it's cool that it was two guys. It's cool. There's two Chinese dudes in Buenos Aires. Like, you don't expect, when do you see that movie? That's awesome. And it makes it very unusual because it's very hard to categorize,
The dislocation of putting them in Argentina also does kind of make them feel like exiles in a weird way, right? They definitely don't fit in. Yeah. And there's also the sense that they have to be each other's support, that they can't escape each other, that even after things go wrong, they're still kind of stuck together because they're each other's anchor. They're each other's home.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like during the shoot, there was a lot. I mean, it sounds like they didn't totally know what they were doing. And there was a lot of, one of them would have to go home and they'd be just kind of waiting there. There's a whole other character who came, an actress who came and was a part of it. And then they ended up cutting her completely out of the film. And, I guess because I shoot in kind of a open way, there's also something, a lot of what Wong Kar-wai does is in the editing, he goes and captures all these magical moments and all these like feelings and moments really, and then he has all these moments and you can tell he doesn't always know. He didn't necessarily know what he was going to do with those moments beforehand. And then in the editing room with his mastery of editing and his, abilities with music, like using images with music, and suddenly you get into this whole world, but it doesn't feel, it doesn't have that kind of, more American classic narrative arc where you can like pitch the film at whatever and wow everyone with your amazing story either.
Oh yeah, it's not a straight line. It feels to me as though he's sort of paying his respects back to Tarantino in a weird way by taking the scrambled feeling of a Pulp Fiction,
Right.
But not taking the influence, right? Because the tone is completely different and the style is completely different, but there is a sense of sort of electric unpredictability, that the life is going on right in front of you, and that these characters are going to make strange decisions that we don't understand, that will only become understandable later. The energy is the same. And it's such an odd thing too, because that's not what Wong usually does. Right. I mean, Chungking Express was brought to North America by Tarantino. It was championed by him, and like Miramax even set him up with an imprint just to release it. And this felt like a tip of the hat in a weird way, but it didn't feel like it was competing or trying to ride the wave. It's just an acknowledgement that this sort of storytelling would work as well.
Yeah, and like huge jumped in time, which is similar, and not giving you everything, letting you do a little bit of the work yourself, but at the same time without being at a very like European remove. It's you're in there with them. That's what's so nice. It's a very like sensorial and immersive film, and those are two buzzwords that everyone's talking about. Their sensorial immersive films. He was doing that. I mean, and so is Tarkovsky, so is Bergman, so is Antonio, so is Fellini, like all those guys. But it feels like for a while there was like less immersion. There's this idea about objectivity or something like that. And his Wong Kar-wai's films, especially that one, is just so subjective. Like there's no distance. You're just in the room with them, in their dreams, in their, like the way he uses Iwasu Falls as this kind of like dream place. You're inside Tony and Leslie's world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know it's a real place because they shot there, but that waterfall may not be real at all. We see it as, it's introduced on a lampshade. It could just be a shared hallucination, a dream of theirs, as you say.
Yeah. And then when you do see the waterfall, they use that, I can't remember which stock they used and whether it was cross-processed or they did something different with it, and it just looks totally different. It's like super blue, super saturated. It's so beautiful. I just want to swim in that image.
Yeah, it's rapturous.
Yeah.
I think I did. I saw it in a dinky screening room in the basement of the famous Players building, where the thing you could always count on would be that the screen would be slightly off, that there would be like a little ribbon of black, but you could never tell where it was going to be. Sometimes it was on the left, sometimes it was on the right, sometimes it was on the bottom. But when the images just wash over us in film, it's 35 millimeter, bright bulb. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
I remember exactly where I was.
Yeah, me too. The first time I saw it, I just finished film school, maybe I was still in film school, and I hadn't seen any of his other films. It sounded kind of weird, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to see this, but they say it looks good. I'll go check it out. And I went to the Egyptian in Montreal, and there was like 5 of us in the theater, and it's so awesome when you don't see something coming, like I didn't know how amazing it was going to be at all. I didn't really know who Wong Kar-wai was. I didn't feel like I had any connection to Chinese cinema, or, you read the blurb about the story. I was like, nah, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, when I left the movie, I was like in tears. I was with my girlfriend at the time, and I was like, I got to just sit here for a while and just like process the emotions, but also just process. It's like, oh, you can do this, you can make films that break rules and are still, I mean, there's a lot of like pretty much straight up experimental ideas in that film. Oh, yeah. And yet it's this like story that gets you. And I feel like sometimes experimental film can be so cerebral, and it's like, it can be very formal and beautiful, but it doesn't come and grab you. And I really like it when there's formal exploration in a film that's got a clear narrative, or not a clear narrative, but that decides to get, grab you as an audience member and like be with people instead of be with ideas.
Yeah. And it breaks down to a simple logline, right? I mean, it's just 2 people contemplating the end of their relationship effectively. Yeah. You can reduce it to that, but that's not what it is to sit through it and experience it.
No, and would you go see that movie? I wouldn't, it's like,
depends who's in it.
Yeah.
But it's this, what we get is so textured and beautiful and sad and funny. I mean, it's aware of who they are, and Wong is letting these actors inhabit the space and be charming to each other here and there. And we get to see flashes of the relationship where it's good, and you can get a sense of what they're chasing once it's over. And I mean, it's about the space between the beginning and the end, and then the next beginning and then the next end, and the sense that, this could be going on over and over and over again. And might, but for the flaws that bring them down. Yeah.
Well, it's an open ending, but there's a feeling that I feel like he's moving on.
Yeah, it feels pretty concrete by the end of it.
When he's on that train in Taiwan or wherever he goes back to. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why it's so devastatingly sad to leave at the end of the film.
Yeah, with that super happy kind of kitschy song. It's so awesome. I feel like it's interesting what you're saying. I feel like in a way it operates more like music, where you listen to Mahler 5 and it's like you're immersed in this like symphonic world that's super intense, but it's not telling you what to think. It's like just showing you, it's like it's expressing emotion, and you can get in there. And that's why, there is a simple log line and you can kind of sum it up, but that's like trying to sum up Mahler by saying like it's a movie about pining, when he was pining for this boy and he had to keep it to himself. That's what it is about, but that's so reductive of what at Mahler's Fifth is like, And I think that that's where this always, films should have a lot more to them than what you could write about. But with this film, he's like working so much with the tools of cinema. We're in a cinematic space, and it's not so much about the text as it is about the cinematic spaces.
Yeah. Well, and that's his gift, I think. Even something like The Grandmaster, which is a straight up action movie, really, especially in the American cut, in the shorter version. He is filling in every detail. He is making sure that the frame tells the story as much as the dialogue does, as much as the music does. He builds these experiences in these pocket universes of his films. And Happy Together and In the Mood for Love are the two that I keep coming back to when I think of Wong, even though I hadn't watched Happy Together for more than a decade. Those are the images that pop up. I mean, sometimes it's just as simple as a really great poster sticking in your brain. Yeah. But just the two of them not making it together is just so perfect and tragic. It's funny, when Ang Lee made Brokeback Mountain, for me, it's the first hour of that film, not the second, that works. The second hour just feels like it's tragic because the story is a tragedy and they need things to go this way. But of course, it's a story about Ennis denying himself and refusing to be happy. And that's frustrating for me as an audience member because, if you present a character whose only impediment to happiness is himself, I find that incredibly frustrating. But that's what Happy Together is about, right? Like the whole point is that they can't make this work because one of them won't grow up. The other can't wait. Past a certain point. And I don't respond to it the same way. I just feel that this one's tragic because Wong understands them from the inside out and doesn't see them as tragic figures. It's just the film is a tragedy in the same way that Brokeback Mountain is a tragedy, but here it's just more like, it's too bad. They know each other so well that they can't connect. And it's simply circumstance. It's just the world around them doesn't let them have the space to figure it out. Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting parallel that I've never thought of. And there's a lot of parallels actually between the two, but what you're saying is true. Like, I mean, I think Brokeback Mountain is actually pretty amazing, but it is very like kind of epic, not necessarily Hollywood, but it's like really beautiful American filmmaking. It feels like, and you're at a certain distance and it's kind of telling you what to think when, and you kind of know what's going on, and you're like, I can't believe this. You feel all the things as you're meant to, and the timing you're meant to. Whereas Happy Together is so much more open, and now suddenly there's a new guy, and he's talking into, like, you're hearing the third guy's thoughts about Tony Leung. You know, it's really much more of this kind of like 3D global experience of what they're living, rather than this kind of like telling you what to think in the way that Brokeback Mountain does. And at the end of the day, I mean, I think Brokeback Mountain is awesome, but it doesn't inhabit me in the same way.
Yeah, you can leave it behind. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like a closed circle, and Happy Together is just more amorphous and hard to pin down.
Yeah, it's open. It's actually a pretty open film in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, this sort of gets me to Sin La Habana, where you've already mentioned that you sort of leaned on Happy Together a little bit as an influence. The way I close this podcast is always to ask people if there's anything of the film they've chosen that they've borrowed or lifted or outright stolen. So let's explore that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a bunch of things. For sure, the idea of switching textures, of going from, you know, shooting on an Alexa to shooting on a Bolex. You know, it's not exactly the same, but also within the Bolex world, within the 16 millimeter world of the film, which kind of represents Leonardo's spiritual dimension, we go from color to black and white. And I wanted it to be kind of seamless, and to not overthink, is, you know, why this needs to be like this. Is more kind of intuitive, which I feel like is probably how Wong Kar-wai makes decisions. It feels like it's very much based on intuition. So I was trying to make a lot of those kind of textural decisions intuitively, which is probably borrowed from Wong Kar-wai. And then, I mean, the kids rollerblading is kind of, I think I had the soccer game in mind, you know, the soccer games that you see Upside Down and Happy Together. But I guess more than anything is like getting in close with people in these small, warm spaces in Cuba. Wong Kar-wai uses much wider lenses than I was, but the kind of movement and the kind of proximity to people is similar. And then also the idea of two people coming together in a place that's not their home. You know, like Nassim and Leonardo are in Montreal. Neither of them is Canadian. And so they're stuck trying to work out their relationship in this place that kind of like acts as a vessel for them to hold them, but isn't, you know, it's not really a Quebecois film in the way that many Quebecois films are very clearly linked to the place. It's kind of a cold, hostile environment that these two people are put in. Buenos Aires is obviously a much kind of warmer environment, but it is also quite hostile to them in a lot of ways. And so, and in the same way, it's two kind of exiles living in a vessel that isn't kind to them.
Yeah. Well, and both Buenos Aires and Montreal feel like Europe, but aren't, right? Like there's even further dislocation that way.
Yeah.
Where you're just subtly not at home wherever you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then also, I mean, I guess it's hard to know when something is that influential on you, like how much of it is from that movie and how much of it is just kind of what I do now. But there's definitely like, I enjoy going into musical sequences and letting music and image kind of tell the story without hammering it too much over the head. And that's something that he does a lot. You know, like, it says so much in Happy Together when Leslie Cheung kind of ignores Tony Leung, gets in the car and smokes a cigarette. He's hanging out with everybody, and then he looks backwards, and then it goes into slow motion, and then there's a rack focus, and you see Tony Leung, and you know that they're thinking about each other, even though he's ignoring him, and that's so much better than if you'd said it. You know, it's just like it's all just and the music is so intense at that moment. You feel what I imagine what Leslie Cheung was feeling and what Tony Leung was feeling.
Yeah, well, he has that. You have dance sequences. They both express things that would work in a musical, right? Where suddenly people have to start singing because they can't contain the emotions that they were speaking of.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the tango scene also, in the tango in the kitchen scene in Happy Together, which is, you know, one of the classic scenes of that movie. As we even shot a kind of similar scene, and it was too similar. I was like, I can't keep this. But definitely the idea of expressing feelings through dance is something that he does really well in that movie, and that I was trying to do with this as well.
It's just so difficult to talk about movies that are all feelings, right? Like yeah. I'm trying to articulate these complex emotional loop-de-loops that Wong pulls off, and just discuss them as though it's a single take or a camera effect or something. But it's just he builds these cohesive, immersive environments. I hate the idea of a virtual reality experience of a movie, but kind of wouldn't mind hanging out in those rooms with these people just for a little while.
Well, yeah. I mean, I hate virtual reality. I keep on trying, and I go and spend all the money, and then I'm like, well, I don't want this at all. Like, it's too much. It's like it doesn't feel immersive. I feel like revolted, kind of. But but an immersive film that lets your mind do the imagining of what that world is so much more interesting to me. And so, really, immersive films like that, or like, I keep on bringing up Tchaikovsky, but like The Sacrifice. What that room, that the house that burns down feels like, or The Mirror, when they're in that farmhouse and there's like, he's floating upside down, there's water coming out of the crack of the walls. You're just immersed in feeling, and that's so awesome.
Yeah. I mean, if there was a VR version of In the Mood for Love, I kind of wouldn't mind getting a closer look at the wallpaper. That's just all I want. I want the textures. I want to live inside Christopher Doyle's frame.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the In the Mood for Love is such a masterpiece of art direction that, for sure, yeah, you want to see what those rooms actually look like. But I feel like in a movie like Happy Together or in Chungking Express, you don't really need to get up. You know what the feeling of that room is. It's not so, it's just In the Mood for Love. It's just so perfect. Everything, every detail is so, which I like, but I prefer Happy Together in a way because it's the energy is so kinetic.
Yeah, it is. It's the outlier, right? It's so vibrant that the screen almost can't contain it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, now I just want to watch it again. That's all. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of these things, is we can keep revisiting them.
Yeah.
And maybe discover something else this time.
Yeah. No, it's cool. And I love that this is a great, I just found out about this a couple of days ago, so I haven't had a chance to check out the other podcast, but I really like that you're doing this. It's a really cool way of talking about a film without talking about one's own film.
Thanks.
And actually thinking about stuff that I wouldn't have made some of those connections. So I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. And well, yeah, I mean, there's 365 other episodes, so you got one a day for a full year if you want to. God help us all. My thanks to Kaveh Nabatian, whose new movie Sin La Habana is screening at the Carlton Cinema in Toronto and available to rent and buy on Apple TV right now. Thanks also to Angie Power. She knows what she did. Kaveh's not on Twitter, but he does have a website, kavehnabatian.com, and you can find Happy Together in the Criterion Collection's magnificent World of Wong Kar-wai box set. It's also streaming on the Criterion channel. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I host the Now What podcast every Friday, and I write far too much about movies and television. This week, Ghostbusters. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Watch movies, stay safe, wear a mask if you go out, and get your shot already. I'll see you next time.